Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Wake Up, Look Up, a podcast where we connect events happening in real time to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm Zach Weihrauch. And this episode comes with a mature warning. So if kids are in the room, you're going to want to hit pause and listen to this one later. Today, we're looking at a horrific story. We're calling it Olympic Rapist. And we're asking the question, when should punishment end? It's the story of 29-year-old Dutch beach volleyball player Steven Velde, who is one half of a men's beach volleyball team from the Netherlands that is currently ranked 11th in the world and will be competing this summer in the Paris Olympics. But Steven has a pretty horrific past. In 2014, he met a 12-year-old girl who was living in the United Kingdom online, and he eventually would travel to meet her in the United Kingdom where he would rape her. He was later convicted of that crime, deported back to the Netherlands, where he spent a year in prison. Fast forward, almost 10 years later, he's now competing for his country in the Summer Olympics. And that begs the question, and a lot of people are asking, where's the justice in that? Should Steven be allowed to participate in the Olympics? And what's the message that we're communicating if the answer is yes? On one side, you have people who are saying that Steven did something awful and he paid for his crime. That the whole point of the criminal justice system is that we assign a particular punishment to a particular offense. And when a person goes on through that punishment and comes out the other side, they should be able to move on with their lives, whatever that life looks like, even if that life includes being an Olympic athlete. On the other side are people who are saying it just doesn't feel like enough. It brings up an interesting question from a Christian perspective. After all, our whole worldview is built on the idea that sinners can be forgiven, that when we come to God with all the ugliness of our lives, whatever form that ugliness might take, that he takes that ugliness and puts it on Jesus on the cross, that he who knew no sin becomes sin in order that we might become the righteousness of God, so that God scatters our sin through the death of Jesus as far as the east is from the west, so that when he looks at us, he does not see our sin, but he sees the finished righteousness of Christ. And it follows then, as Christians, that we should be asking the question, if that's what God does with our sin, how should we be thinking about the sin of those who are criminal? We should be thinking about horrific crimes and whether or not, as a society, we should turn the page and move past them. Well, I think what's happening here is that it's easy to conflate two really important ideas. Surely my hope is that my sin was placed on Jesus, that when God looks at me, he does not see my sin, but the righteousness of Christ. But the Bible makes clear that eternal forgiveness does not necessarily equate to earthly circumstances being lifted. The most obvious case of this, of course, is the thief on the cross, who's dying next to Jesus. He will even say that Jesus is dying as an innocent man, but that he is guilty of his offenses. And when Jesus forgives that man and tells him that today you will be with me in paradise, he conspicuously doesn't do one other thing. He doesn't take the guy off the cross. He doesn't provide him relief from the earthly circumstances he's experiencing. That's because the Bible affirms the forgiveness of God and the reality of earthly circumstances. As Christians, when we're sorting through these things, the questions we should be asking is, what is the most loving thing in this situation? What is the most loving to God, and what is the most loving to our neighbor? I think the reason why the Netherlands should be telling Steven that he cannot compete in this summer's Olympics is because in this case, the most loving thing to do is not to allow Steven to turn the page. It's to validate the value and experience of a then 12-year-old girl. Can you imagine that girl turning on the Olympics to see her rapist being celebrated as a gold medal winner? The Olympics are about national pride. They're about celebrating the best and brightest of our athletes, about celebrating their achievements and accomplishments. And in this case, I believe Steven has lost the right to be celebrated on the national stage. That's because the value of that 12-year-old girl is such that while Steven can spend a year in prison and move on, she will never move on. What the Netherlands should be more concerned about than validating Steven's athletic ability should be validating the experience of that girl, who's now a young woman, of saying to her, you matter. and we aren't going to celebrate what is horrific to you, Stephen should be able to move on with his life. And I hope it's a life of hope and meaning and purpose. I hope it's a life in which he meets Jesus and that his sin is dealt with in the same way mine was on the cross. But Stephen's life should not be one of national pride and celebration. The consequences of his choices are that should be taken away from him. We can be forgiven in Christ, but consequences remain. And in this case, loving a young woman who experienced something horrific is way more important than sports. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Make sure you hit like and subscribe to get future content from Wake Up Look Up and from Christ Community Chapel. And while you're here, check out the other videos we have available.